So, Ksitew, can I ask you a question? So, this question is about sacred space. There are two things which I'd like some clarity. You say that every space is sacred, and at one and neither of the things that you say I disagree with. I just would like some clarity. But then, whenever there are ceremonies, why is it that we then do some things, take some actions to bring about that sense of the sacred? Can you give some clarity there?
Because my experience is that in general, the people I'm working with, my students and you and my friends on Facebook and whatnot, understand and accept intellectually at least that all space is sacred. And they can do that without being in sacred space in their own awareness. But if we move into sacred space consciously, which we do in ceremony, then I force that awareness out of all this other stuff, which is also sacred, into another dimension that we can play games with, or we can have ceremonies in it, we can have attunements with. And they accept that because at some level they believe me. Even people who say they didn't believe me end up in sacred space somehow. I'm not sure how that happens exactly. But it became pretty clear to me that, yeah, everybody more or less says, yeah, everything is ceremony, everything is prayer. If God is everywhere is sacred. You can't escape that logic. But they don't feel it. They don't experience it that way, even though they acknowledge that that's the way it is. And it's like acknowledging that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and then every time they turn around, they say things like, "Oh, that's so beautiful," or "You make me happy," or I mean, it's just the way our consciousness works in this culture. I don't know about other cultures, but it just seems easier for people to shift their consciousness if I say, okay, now we're going to go into sacred space. And what we're really going into, I think, is our spirit being, which is in communication all the time with everybody anyway. But that's a theory. All I know is that it works, because if I invite people into sacred space for a ceremony and then they share, they're always surprised that all those other people share the same kinds of things they shared. Like, okay, that is confirmation. And I think it's our own spirits that allow us to confirm that. It's not magical. And I don't get confused about it, because God is just as much, if we could talk about it in terms of dimensions, God is just as present in this dimension of imaginary flesh and form as it is in the imaginary place where we hold ceremonies. And that has a lot to do with today's subject, although I come at it from a completely different place. But we're really talking about the inward path. And when we go inward, suddenly there is a world there that we have been ignoring. It's not that it was ever gone, we just weren't paying any attention. We're very focused on this illusion that we live in. Yeah, and I am too. I mean, I don't expect anybody to be any different than I am. But we move out of it. And some people use meditation to do that. Some people talk about stilling their mind. I'm not sure that's the answer, but if it works for them, who am I to complain? Some people, I found working with some people who say, I don't believe in any of that stuff. I said, well, can you daydream? And they say, sure, okay, let's daydream. we're going to daydream together. We're going to have the same daydream. And some reason that'll work better than this is sacred. We're going into sacred space, and you know, and I don't account for that. I just try to accommodate people, take them where they are, and move them into those spaces. Um, Push comes to shove, I'm an engineer. If it works, it's okay. That's my criteria for deciding how I'm going to work with things. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. When we consider nothing as away from sacred, then I think it's wonderful that as we were talking, a phone call came. And when you're in the separate dimension that you were talking of, in the invert path, or the path that we normally are not used to, then then we take that as a message, and maybe we understand what it was. Maybe for some reason there was that pause, but if we are not aware, then we just think of it as a distraction.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
for that reason, I was wondering, like when we have these meetings on Monday, which dimension do you feel uh, it would be nice if we came from?
A number of people who come to these things that have never been in etheric space with me. Randy's one of them. We've never had ceremony together in etheric space. Mom is another one. We've never had a joined experience in etheric space. So it's difficult to know how that would function. It might be something that'd be fun to try. I certainly wouldn't be adverse to trying. But you know, with the Reiki stuff, before anybody ever joined medicine Reiki, I asked they do a ceremony so that they knew whether or not it was for them. And we don't do a ceremony here asking people if this is on their path or not. They show up, but we don't know whether there's curiosity or it's loneliness or we don't know. That's just where it's at. We haven't asked them to do a ceremony so that they know in their own mind this is something that's important for them. But again, that's something we can certainly try and see how it works. I'm all in favor of experimenting. I was brought up with Edison's notion of the way to deal with failure is to say, oh, we know one more thing that doesn't work. Let's move on. And I think that's a good way to deal with our own expectations. It's a good way to deal with things that don't work out the way we wanted them to. It's a good way to live life. Anyway, if you have a preference, see, I think the issue is not what do I think works best, but a question of what do the people who sign in here want? Okay, that seems to me to be more important than what I think works best. Because if everybody wants to do it, I am quite confident that it will work. And I'm probably leaving Mom and Randall in the dusk about what we're talking about here. On Zoom, and he continually speaks of the space of no words. And as a culture, we like answers. You know, that there's something reassuring about thinking we understand what's going on. And well, it makes life fun. But more and more, I appreciate the reality that there is stuff that culturally we have a very difficult time sharing. Really tough. And that is a nice lead in into the ninth subject, as a matter of fact. And it's 7 o'clock. at my computer. So let me check in to start. Uh, I'm good. Uh, but life is somewhat chaotic in that we now have a friend across the way here in the village who had to go to the hospital, and they did a scan today, and it's like we take care of his dog, or Kathleen more appropriately takes care of his dog. And so that's moving in and out. And he's okay, except that when he's home, he falls down and hurts himself, and that needs attention. So he had a brain scan today. And then my dearly beloved brother-in-law's grandson was shot by the police. It was clearly a death by suicide, and the cops were not faulted by anybody in the family. But he flew west to be at the funeral, and the kid's dad, his son, in his grief, took off on a motorcycle and ended up crashing in the hospital. So there was that kind of excitement. And then I got the results of my field of view testing for my eyes, and they're perfectly normal. There's still something wrong with the retina, but my field of vision is just fine. They said they won't need to see me for another 9 months. So I've got my 40-year-old face on today. Life is good. And just within our household, there are no problems. Kathleen got her second shot. She had a bad reaction in that she got the fever and her arm was sore and she was shaking. But 24 hours later, she was fine. It just happened. And I suspect that shows she has a better immune system than I do. But that's just a theory. Life is good. And I'm looking forward to this evening. And that's stick in. And Randy, would you like to pick up the stick? And check I was close to the last week. In various ways, people have been talking about conversing with things that like stones and trees and baskets. And of course, not everyone perceives stones and trees and baskets and such as having anything to say. And if it were something to say, it probably wasn't very important. And who wants to slow down and stop what they're doing and listen? I can tell you from experience, I think rocks talk slower than most people do. And I thought I'd start and share one of my stories about listening to and conversing with these sorts of objects that in English are not conscious and not entities. I don't know how long it was before, while I was apprenticed to Abe, but at one point he said, I want you to go to the Pipestone River and listen to the stones and find a stone that wants to be made into a pipe, and then bring it back and make it into a pipe that it wants to be, which is how I became a pipe maker. And I've been with Abe long enough to trust him, so it didn't matter what he asked me to do, no matter how crazy it might have seemed to me in my previous lives, but I was willing to do what he said regardless. And I trusted it. I didn't doubt. But I didn't know the difference between granite or soapstone or pipestone or crystal. I didn't have any of that kind of geological information. I've never studied it. And I'm supposed to go to this river and look for a stone that wants to be made into a pipe. I was fortunate because Eva didn't think I was crazy either when I said we need to go to the Pipestone River. And this is going to require an overnight trip. Um, so we went, and I walked along the riverbank, and I hear stones. I don't know what they were saying, but they weren't saying, I want to be a pipe. I, I didn't understand what they were saying, but they might have been saying, for all I know, leave me alone. I was happy where I was. But I did put them back where I got them. And then finally, this one just resonated. I knew that was the one. And it turned out it actually was the right one. And it was actually pipestone, which I wouldn't have been able to know. And we took it back, and I started my experiences as a pipe maker. Now, I think at another level, I had communicated with the wind and the trees, but it was a different level. It was, I don't know how to describe the difference. I thought it might be interesting to share your experiences with this, or your belief that this is just nonsense, that, trees can't talk. I don't care what your particular belief set is. That what I care about is that you share your authentic experiences in these regards, right? I know that a lot of Americans talk to their cars, and I know a very large percentage of them actually believe that matters. Um, and then there are those who talk to their car but don't think it makes any difference. Anyway, with that, I'm going to put the stick in because I am beyond knowing that these things that we generally think of as inanimate are conscious beings that, if we will communicate with us in some fashion. And with that, I'll put the stick back in and invite someone to pick it up.
Absolutely. It's very interesting that you chose this subject today. I was supposed to have a counseling session and do some EMDR work, and it got canceled. So I went to a lake out here, Chickahominy, and as I'm fishing, two geese fly by right above me, and I don't know how to explain it. There's no explanation for it, but I could feel my grandpa in those geese. He was an avid goose hunter, and a guy I really respected. He had a very hard life, uh, and was just coming out of some of his uh, shell, I guess you could call it, and getting in touch with, I believe, spirituality. He, for the longest, he was a mean man right up till about 40, and then he started changing and accepting more of himself and his grief, and uh, started playing with his kids and just becoming more active in everybody's life. And but he passed away at 60. He had a massive heart attack. But anyways, that feeling, that's happened to me more than it's happening a lot more these days. And I keep trying to figure it out. Is it something I'm doing, or is it just this is what happens? So I truly believe uh, that we're all connected on big time, that I'm not even, that I'm just now beginning to be aware of the tree out front here. I've sat under it, and for brief moments I've talked to, just, I try not to think and just feel the tree. And when I do that, when I can manage to allow myself to do that, things come back. I hear from the tree, how old the tree is and how long it's been there, and it's really, it really touches me, I guess, and it's really hard to put it into words. It comes from that place of no words, feelings, which is something I'm just starting to feel like to feel. Oh, It's there's way more to this than I could possibly imagine, and I know it as I get more in touch with that. There's just, yeah, I'm going to continue to work with that. That's my story. I'll put the stick back in.
I can pick up the stick because recently I had a close encounter with a tree. Uh, Not Teresa, but another tree. And this is quite a large oak tree, must have been 30 or 40 years old, that's growing in, well, we say my garden, but it's not mine, right? It's just happens to be where I live. And it was very beautiful. And the two trees, two of them side by side, but I needed them to be pruned because they were getting very crowded. And I was told by the arborist that I have to get it cut. I have to basically what I consider killing it. It was very distressing for me because what I like to do is to keep making sure that the trees that are felled in any storm come back to life, not to kill a tree. So I was extremely distressed that day. I had to agree because they said that it'll otherwise the house will get destroyed. And I kept going to the tree and hugging it and saying sorry, apologizing. And then someone reminded me that I should listen to the tree, don't just talk to it. And so I did that, and immediately, and that's why I like, because it didn't speak, it just showed me a vision, and it showed me a vision of this house full of light. And many people have told me that because there's so many ceremonies and many things we do in this house, everyone who comes here feels it's their house. And so maybe that's what was needed. It was needed for it to go at that time. I said, am I just thinking of this because it suits me? But I know how distressed I was and how peaceful that half a second vision made me. Both of them seemed like surrender to me because it was still painful to some extent. But then a lot of it was made into mulch, from which now lots of little plants are growing on their own, even without my watering them or doing anything. So it hasn't died. It's actually full of life. It's brought new life into the garden. So, yes, they do speak, and this was my most recent experience. Thank you.
Hey, hey, Teresa, you want to say something?
Again.
Well, we shall see what happens here. I too have been dropping off on and off the call. and getting parts, and then I get some parts where y'all sound like Charlie Brown's teacher in the comedy. I've had, so the question is communicating with inanimate, what is considered by some as inanimate objects. And Ksitew has started screen sharing. Okay, I thought I was dropping off the call again. I've had many experiences. I believe I've shared with you all that I communicate with my motorcycle. To me, it's an iron pony. And, you know, she lets me know when she's hungry. She lets me know when she wants to cruise. She lets me know if she's been sitting too long. And well, over the winter, I heard her cry a couple times when the snow hit her. So, yes, I do a little blessing, and we pray together before we take off. I've been out in the desert and had stones speak with me, and I've had stones actually guide me where I need to go. And that was quite an experience because it led me, one of the latest experiences out there, very memorable for me, was being led to a birthing lodge and a coming of age lodge out here on the, what I have come to learn as the Standing Bear mountain range. We call it the Cook Range. I would say the most recent communication I've experienced, well, I've been talking to grandmother aunt. I have aunts that seem to want to come in and join in the dog food party here in my little toy hauler. And it's not a problem, you know, I've shared with them, hey, it's not a problem, just don't be crawling on me in the middle of the night, tickling me. So we are working out an arrangement, which reminded me of an arrangement I made back when I had the doghouse with groundhogs, or not groundhogs, moles. It was moles. And I had a acre, almost a 2-acre section that was fenced in for the dogs. And many of the dogs enjoyed trying to hunt these moles. And so it would make a big mess in the dog yard. And every once in a while, one of them would get caught. And I would have to retrieve it and do a little ceremony, or, you know, bury it. So I had a conversation with the moles and saying, you know, I've got 5 acres out here. You're more than happy to have you live on this 5 acres. I just need you to stay outside of the dog perimeter, the dog yard. And they would listen, they would move out. And then the next year they would come back, and I'd have to remind them, please, this was the arrangement we made. Talk to your kids. And after a few years, the arrangement was good. It was very, very good. So those are my experiences, and I thoroughly enjoy them. So I will turn it over to you. You are attempting to share something here with us, so I will turn the stick back in.
One of the things that I'm muted. No, I'm not. One of the instances that came up this week was I have been rereading Braiding Sweetgrass, and there's a whole chapter in there about when Robert Kilmer is taking a class in basket weaving because she wasn't raised to do that by her mom. And so she went to a basket maker of her tribe and learned the process. And the entire process discusses, going to around the trees, the black ash, and asking permission and which ones are okay to cut, which ones give us permission, which ones don't, and how you handle with respect each and every aspect. And I'm amazed how our creativity works, because I had no finished rereading that, then a post came up with this picture. And this is called a strawberry basket for picking wild strawberries. This is the cover for the basket here. And it's on Facebook. And in the comments section of this that contained this photo, it recommends highly that we talk to the baskets and listen to the baskets, communicate with them, honor their existence as conscious beings. And I thought, okay, this particular set of images just grabbed hold of me and rang my bells. I really resonate with that. And just in the picture, it talks to me. And I thought, well, I'd like to share that because it is very striking. And it's particularly difficult kind of weaving of the basket. These little curlicues here are not at all simple to do. And when you start with the black ash and you have to cut it from the wood, and then you have to peel off these pieces, and it's a very complex process which requires a great deal of attention. And the basket makers have this incredible gratitude for the sacrifice of the tree. And they're very careful. They express that gratitude very carefully in making sure that absolutely nothing is wasted. And when people are learning in this basket class, it's interesting. The instructor reminded them that the lessons of the tree were all around them on the ground. And what was there were the pieces of the tree that had not been used. Perhaps they'd been not peeled correctly, or perhaps they were too short, but they were on the ground as scrap. And he said, that's not the way we show respect. So then they began to pick up all the shorter pieces that could be used for a small bowl. And the very short ones, they put in a special basket to save as kindling, so that nothing was wasted. And I thought that whole relationship between the basket weavers and the tree was incredibly good example of what we're missing most of the time in our culture. And that's a relationship that we recognize that therein lies our relative and therein lies a being. And one of the questions Timmerman asked in her books is, what if our requirements for getting a permit for a mall, to build a mall on a block of ground, was to get the opinion of the chickadees, the squirrels, and the chipmunks? I thought, she calls that's the true democracy. She said, when all the web of life has something to contribute to the conversation. And the idea of a developer going out and asking the chickadees and the robins and the squirrels and the chipmunks how they felt about turning that place into a mall struck me as the entire story of what's wrong with our civilization, the Western civilization, and the things we need to learn from the First Peoples. Anyway, I wanted to share that story because those baskets, all of them are amazing, but this one in particular with the use of red and green on the cover, and the white flower are just stunning examples of native basket weaving, and done with respect and done with recognition of the um, relationship with the tree that the basket comes from. And with that, I'll put the stick in and let other people talk about their experiences with those sorts of things.
Okay, I'll pick up the stick again. Ksitew, you said something, but you were on mute.
Yeah, it muted itself that time. I posted this in either the Tribe of Healers or the Abode of the Clean Bone, and that includes all of the discussion or the comments from the maker of the basket about taking the time to talk to the basket. And he talks about the problem they're having with the black elms, um, with infestations from uh, alien critters from other countries. So if you're in that particular Google group, feel free to look it up and read it. It's very interesting. At least I found it interesting. And it refers to a website which continues with that whole theme. Anybody like to pick up the stick?
Well, I'll pick up till someone is ready. For me, this is interesting, Kisitwa, because usually when I thought of things and having spirit, I would think of them as inspirited by the human interactions with them, you know? So, in other words, I didn't really feel their sense, and that's possibly why I like so much the what we call the Native Americans or the indigenous view of life, because it's very earth based. It brings the spirit into the material, you know, and I enjoy that a lot uh, because then you start seeing from the things point of view and not from your point of view. But I have to say that this is something that I will develop, because till now when I look at things, I used to say, oh, why are we interested in material things? And actually, this is going to bring me into another question for you, Kisitwa, after everyone has shared.
All questions are welcome. But life is really different. You'll notice when I talk about hunting with Mel Paul, he's talking to grandmother Moose. That's his relative. She is like his grandmother. She's not some weird somebody else's grandmother. He's related to her in that kind of loving relationship that Teresa was talking about. And so when he asks for sacrifice, he knows he's asking for something sacred. He knows that. And I remember having a similar experience I've shared before, where I got up to the Yukon, and the Yukon has mosquitoes the size of bombers, and they swarm. And it is just incredible. And most people run around with off and whatever else, anti-mosquito nets over the long sleeves. And I mean, they will literally drive some people crazy. And I started that way because that's what everybody else was doing. And then I remembered my teachers, and I sat down and had a conversation with Grandmother Mosquito, very much like I suggested Teresa talking to Grandmother Mouse. I said, look, I don't want to kill your people. I don't want to do that. I don't want them eating from me either. I said, can't we, I'll stop using all this stuff. It's poison for you. And you stop biting me. How, can we do that? And from then on, I walked around in short sleeve shirts and everybody else thought I was crazy. Mosquitoes didn't bother me. I would have visitors from other places and we always want to go on tours. And the only tours in the Yukon are in the bush. I mean, it's like, there's really no city to tour. And so we go along the canyon, along the Yukon River, and go up maybe to Dawson City and look at the tour of the gold fields. But they always wondered how come I didn't have all this stuff all over me, and how come I had short sleeve shirts, and how come I had a hat, but it was to keep the radiation off me, not I didn't have a net on it. And it was just a very practical way to live. But I didn't live that way my whole life. I had to learn to live that way. I had to learn that do that. Reiki helped a lot. When we moved into this house, there was a dogwood tree and it was planted too close to the house and it was dying. It was clearly nearly dead. And I just started, every time I passed by, hanging on to it for a minute and giving it Reiki. And now it's healthy. And I even had to take another branch off because it was pushing into the house. And I offered it tobacco and I talked to it and took it out. But the tree blooms beautifully. It's kind of a funny looking thing because unlike most dogwoods, it's almost straight up, because it's planted this close to the house. And that was not a good place to put it. Nobody asked it where it wanted to be planted, So it's taken a long time. I mean, it was just easier to tear things up and replace them with what I wanted. And I've always liked, to some extent, to garden. And since I moved here, I tell people, there are no weeds in God's garden. And a lot of people think that means that he only grows pretty flowers, which is not at all what I mean. It means that everything that shows up in his garden is blessed. And that you don't call them weeds and flowers, you call them God's plants, And this village is interesting in that respect. We have no lawns. Absolutely none. Nobody's planted a lawn here. What we have are mowed weeds. And the place looks very nice. It really does. It looks like we got lawn. What we have are all the natural stuff that'll grow here. Dandelions, lots of dandelions. And we have a guy who comes in and every week or 2 weeks, he rides his mower around and he's got another guy riding another mower around and he's got a guy with a weed eater running around trimming the driveways and stuff. Well, we didn't plant any lawns. It's all just native growth. And if I had my way, I'm not sure we'd even mow it. But that would harm another traditional Western value. Our property values would go down if we didn't mow the lawn. And there's something a bit weird about that, but that is the way it is. And everybody who comes up here is retired. And I like to say we are the, I've forgotten the term now. Doesn't matter. I really think life is enriched. Certainly my life's been enriched when we begin to acknowledge all of the web of life around us. Even if you have to kill it, and sometimes that seems to be necessary, if not desirable. Acknowledging that and not just taking it for granted that you have a right to stamp out anything that displeases you, but acknowledging that you are, in fact, sacrificing one of your relatives, a part of life, a part of the web of life. We're all in it. We can't escape it. It's fundamental to who and what we are. And most people seem to have forgotten it from the Western heritage. which I think is a shame, personally. My life's better for being able to talk to the azaleas. My life's better for being able to talk to and harvest the sweetgrass. My life's better by talking to Grandmother Mosquito and Grandmother Moose than it was before I did that. Yeah. Just saying. Randy, got anything to say?
Yeah. I grew up in my family hunted a lot. That was what we did, both as a family thing and as a way to eat the meat. However, I've always struggled with it. I've always been a good hunter, finding things where a lot of people couldn't, and I don't know why that is. It's just, but when I would kill an elk, it really started getting to me when the calf was with her, with the mom, and I'd have to kill the calf as well. And so these days I've kind of put a back door on hunting because number one, I don't need the meat. I'm really not sure how I feel about all of that just yet, but why I brought that up, but I just, it's no longer what I want to do in my heart is just go kill something to kill something. Now, if I was starving and needed the meat, I guess that's what my point was. Then I would go out and hunt. There's something else I was going to say.
Well, if it comes back to you, just jump in. Don't
Keep
wait.
losing my train of thought. What was the original question? I can get that back.
Well, originally we were talking about what I consider part of the inward path, and that is our experience with recognizing those things outside us as part of the web of life and having a consciousness and able to communicate with them. Okay? Not necessarily in words, probably never in words, but one of the things that Robin Kimmerer said is that she didn't know how to describe how the leak spoke to her saying yes or no, but when they said no, it was like a great big red stop sign flashing in front of my eyes, and I knew that meant no. I think the way it happens is different for everybody.
Yeah, okay, now I follow it again. You know, I never understood or got into why people go out and kill coyotes or kill, target shoot at little chipmunks out there. I guess there's always just been some kind of thing that if you don't kill them, you don't eat them. Why kill them? But
It's almost a national sport called varmint hunting.
yeah, it is. It is. Taking, yeah, taking, yeah. I don't know. To me, it just seems like a waste. There's other things you could do. It seems like than to just go out and shoot things, just to kill something. Every time I've killed something, I've generally felt that. It's not a happy feeling for me to go. I don't get any anger out because I don't get any kind of release of anything. I do enjoy hunting when I did hunt.
I understand that. Um, I think in terms of communication, you have you've experienced your empathy and where you understand what other people are feeling, whether no matter what they're saying, and you also have more than once indicated that you understand what they're thinking as well. And I think the communication is the same when you're dealing with these so-called inanimate objects. It's an intuitive knowledge of what's going on. It's not some kind of spoken or written word. You know? I think it's just an expansion of that. I think that's our normal, natural way of communicating, not just with each other, but with the entire web of life. Uh,
When it comes to things, like objects, like a TV, my TV or fireplace or things like that. For the longest time, I always tried to get the bigger, the better, and have, things were important to me. Uh, Now it's more like I've kind of adopted the belief of, I try and be happy with what I have, and more things seem to show up, whatever I need, but I only try to get the essentials of what I need. If I don't need it, if it's not a need, I just kind of, I'm working towards being extremely grateful for just the things that I have, uh, rather than chase down to fill up an empty hole that never gets filled by things. But I do believe in respecting what you have, taking care of the things that you have. Uh, that was instilled in me by my grandpa early on in life. He was he was big on what you what you earn or what you get. Take good care of it, and it'll take good care of you.
the the uh, Robin Kimmerer, who wrote this Braiding Sweetgrass, says something really interesting, just in respect to what you're saying. She said the universal law is, do not take more than you need. So, but when that gets all tangled up with the difference between what we need and what we want, a more fundamental basis for the law is take no more than what is given. And if we operated at that level, our lives would indeed be much richer. Uh, we still have a notion in our culture that we have the right to take what we want. You know? And Robin goes to a great deal of length talking about there are rules like don't harvest more than half, don't take more than half. And I saw that played out when we went berry picking. Don't take all the berries. You got to leave berries for the bears. And I was surprised Robin was talking about when they left a patch of, I think it was sweetgrass, but it may have been something else. They'd taken about half. But on the way out, they tied a knot in a certain particular weed. And Robin asked the old lady, why did you do that? And she said, this will let other people know we have already harvested here. So that they won't come and take half of what's left, from the half that we left. And that notion of going from take only what you need to take only what you're given is a really major shift in perspective in terms of how important we human beings are on this planet. Uh, imagine not taking more than was offered to you.
All right.
From the land or from the air, or.
Maybe like
Exactly.
they have a rule here that if you cut a tree, then you have to plant two more or 10 more, something like that. So if that rule was followed for those who feel they need to hunt, well, then somehow help two more animals in the place. I feel the
The
only way.
Swiss,
Yeah, sorry.
The
I don't
Swiss
know.
have that kind of rule about trees. In Switzerland, you can't cut down a tree without permission, and part of getting permission is where you are going to plant the new one.
It's the same here where I live.
Hmm. Well, it makes sense. If you look at areas where that rule did not apply, like Lebanon. Now, Lebanon today is mostly just desert. This is, I mean, it's desert and cities. But if you read the literature from just a century ago, it was a beautifully forested land, and the redwoods were incredible, and there were all these beautiful trees. And, you know, they all got cut down for firewood and for weapons and for whatever people wanted. And the end result is Lebanon is a desert country now. You know? I suspect the same thing was true in what's now Palestine and Israel. That otherwise the kibbutz couldn't bring life back to the land. That would not have been possible if the land itself was rejecting life. But it isn't the land that's rejecting life. It's the killing off all the life there by the human beings. And
Yeah, this is an interesting country as far as, you know, like uh, everything that they show is plays into the fear that you don't have enough. Um, there's never enough. Yet you look at all the homeless people, all the houses that are out there that are empty, all the food that gets thrown away, all the starving people that are on the streets, all this other stuff that is there, and there is way more than enough to fulfill all of the needs. But to keep, I'm not sure, you know, it's some kind of hierarchy or something to keep you down and believing that there's not enough and to be afraid of it, because I believe we're all provided for and could be provided for
yeah,
without that fear of
it's really easy to join the Ain't It Awful Club about America. I mean, there are cities where you'll go to jail if you move into an empty home, one that's been foreclosed, sitting there empty for 6 months, nobody using it's going to hell. It'd be better if somebody were living in it. Well, you'd go to jail if you just move in. There are cities where they are poisoning food because the group of the nonprofit people who were using the food to pay poor people didn't have a permit. There are cities where if you give a haircut free to a homeless person, you can be put in jail for breaking a city ordinance. I mean, we have a lot of examples of placing the value of things well above the value of human well-being. I don't think it's helpful to focus in on how awful those things are. One of the first lessons I was taught was don't join any Ain't It Awful clubs.
Yeah.
You know, and you can really dive deep into a hole of depression if you join those. And I remember the righteous indignation and the righteous anger and how righteously wonderful it was that I could blame the government for the way they treated Indians in the residential schools. I mean, I was pissed, you know, not like I could have done anything about it. It happened before I ever moved to Canada. And I mean, you know, it's like, and my elder just looked at me and said, well, don't join any Ain't It Awful clubs. You don't find any kind of serenity there. You don't find any kind of joy there. You don't find the love there. All you find is your anger and the ulcers that result from it and the violence that flows out of it. So yeah, it's easy, and I don't pretend it doesn't exist. I spent too many hours sitting with people living in caves in the Willamette River or the Saskatchewan River. And, people living in garbage bins, and I've seen it all. But to put a lot of energy into how awful it is that we allow that, as opposed to how can I contribute to reducing it, was not useful for me. It did not make for a happy camper. All right, it's 4 minutes after 8. Does anyone have any closing remark? Or rather, I will just invite you. Owen, would you like to add any closing arguments, discussions? I don't mean arguments, actually, but just closing comments. I guess she's disappeared too. Teresa, you have any closing comments?
Both of them were having a poor connection.
Yeah, I understand that actually. Sometimes mine is the same way. People are talking like 10 times slower than a southern drawl. Who are you talking to now? That's the way my system works sometimes. All right. If no one has anything more to say, I'm going to bless you all and say good night. Hope to see you tomorrow's advanced healing, Saturdays, Thursdays at Holin's group, Saturdays, general mutual sharing of life and its wonders. See you all later.